Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm doing this year that I've never done before, and it sounds stupid, but it's important to me, is I'm rereading my favorite books. And I think of it like relationships where like, and I think this is actually, I think 90% of people are non-rereaders is what I call them.
Yeah.
No one rereads because they're looking for the next thing. What's the next movie? What's the next book? What's the next thing in this like story? What the next seminar? But I was reflecting on it and I was like, I have the same friend. So you notice some of the things in my life, I always want new things, right? And I think novelty is very common. But at the same time, I was like, man, these books I say are my favorite ever. And I know they're my favorite and I haven't read it in 5 or 10 years. Why don't I go just reread and see what's already there? So I'm like rereading Essentialism, Ultimate Sales Machine, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm starting with 7 Habits. I'm like halfway through. And I'm like, dude, it's like gold nugget after gold nugget. That book is insane. And I'm just like, why am I looking for another book? This book is great.
Yeah, when you repeat things, you see different layers and details that you didn't see before. This is something that, have you ever tried like Ryan Holiday's method of having a commonplace book? Where I'll be reading a book and I'll dog-ear a bunch of pages, and then I'll go back through a couple weeks later and I'll go to each dog-ear, and then you actually will write down the part that was interesting for that. So you have an index card, so you're like really doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
Then there's other books that I reread, like Tim Kreider's We Learn Nothing. The essays in there are just, you have never had an original thought about the human condition.
No way.
Because
What's
this
it called?
book, We Learn Nothing. Actually, Tim Ferriss, I think, published it in audiobook or something like that. He definitely did a lot of promotion of it. But I've been reading it just as I've been trying to get better at writing over the last year. Just especially if you're trying to get better at writing, or if you really want to get to understand a writer and internalize what they write, just reread their stuff over and over again.
I mean, I think that's
out loud sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great lesson for everything, where one, I don't go back to the books, like now I am, but what I do is once I read a book, I'd say 70% of the books I do a book report. Mm-hmm. And I'll publish them on OkDork, or I'll keep them private if it's like a smaller, less takeaways. Yeah. But those book reports I never reread, but it just helps me internalize a little bit more writing those things down.
Add some rigor to it. I've got a book list at academy.net/reading. And so I'll write stuff about books that I read as well. It helps bring rigor to, because there were for so long I would read books and be like, oh, that book was awesome. And then somebody would be like, oh, what's it about? And then I realized I actually don't know.
That's why I don't like blog posts, because blog posts and like podcasts for some extent, like their same message is not repeated enough for me to take it away. Mm-hmm. Right? But when I read a book, as you said, like they're saying one thing literally for 300 pages. And at the end of 300 pages, I'm like, all right, I got it. Stop.
Yeah.
But one thing to add to that, and that's why I prefer books in general as a learning format.
Yeah.
Books are, a direct teacher. But I think one thing that you were saying that I think for myself I'm learning, and maybe for the audience here too, is that like how can you go to someone who already is an expert around it? Like you were saying, this guy is a great writer. I read his stuff; it makes me better. And I think we just are like, oh, that's cool. But in all aspects of your life, like why aren't you going to a health expert? Why aren't you going to like a dressing expert? Like I'm using an interior design expert right now. I'm using a Hebrew expert. I'm looking for a marketing expert, either to surround yourself with. Basically, it's like, why wouldn't you want to, if you're wanting to improve and grow yourself, like why the best is someone who's already done it.
Yes.
Right? They've already been to the promised land. Like you go there and they're like, oh yeah, just turn left on Albuquerque and you'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. You can talk to somebody for 5 minutes and just get...
Dude, like the webinar guys, I've had 2 webinar experts review our presentation. Now Ronik's leading our webinars. And they like literally watched it. And like one of them did something really amazing. He was looking at the times of everything that happened during the webinar. He's like, at 4 minutes, this happened. At 6. So he broke it down on like a per minute basis. Mm-hmm. He was actually able to adjust like attention levels and like activities because he's looking at the times of the webinar.
Wow.
So like even with the podcast, you don't really get that level of detail of data, but maybe we put something in the middle, like in the middle and at the end, you have like tracking things that like I'll say something like, hey, go to this link and see if anyone goes.
Yes.
But that's something that an expert who's done this thousands or millions, but thousands of times can come in and give you that. But that's, I think that can apply to almost every aspect of life.
Yeah.
But I think most people aren't willing to spend the money too. I think people are like, oh, I don't want any money. But it's like, if you think about the compounded, one, you only live once, so this time doesn't come back. And so the money is what it's for. That's what the money is for. But the second thing as well is the compounded return. Compounded returns is one of the most amazing things, but the compounded return of the knowledge that will then exist forever is just going to produce like dividends beyond your dreams, beyond like what the random ass stock market does to me. I fucking hate the stock market.
Speaking